video, I want to break down this direct materials spending variance of $1,347.25 favorable into multiple components. Now, if you think about the spending variance, there could be at least two reasons why they spent less than expected. One is they may have purchased the material at a price that was lower than expected, and two, they may have used less material than expected, or some combination of those two things. To accomplish this task of breaking apart this direct material spending variance into the price and quantity components, I'm going to add some additional structure here. Okay, now that I have the structure, it'll make it a little bit easier and hopefully we can draw some connections here. So I'm going to calculate three different numbers for material, and then I'm going to calculate the differences between those numbers to get a variance. So let's start by entering numbers in these three columns here. This first number is the standard quantity allowed times the standard price. What is standard quantity allowed? The standard quantity allowed means we're going to take the standard amount of wood per top of 0.2 linear feet per top, and we'll multiply that by the actual amount of tops that we produced and sold. Okay, so that's 3,170 linear feet of wood that we should have used to make these tops. So that's the standard quantity allowed. Now, we also want to multiply that by the standard price. Now, what do we mean by standard price? The standard price is simply the standard cost for wood. Okay, so we're going to multiply it by that $2 there. So we get a total of $6,340 that we should have spent on the 3,170 linear feet of wood. And that number should look familiar. And you probably already saw that, but that's the same number that's on the flexible budget. It's just another way of saying that. I'm going to add an arrow in here to highlight that connection. Boom, okay. So we've got basically that flexible budget number right there. Let's go ahead and jump to the far right now. In this column, we've got the actual quantity times actual price. Let me go ahead and just, this bothers me a little bit. I'm going to center these. Okay, that looks a little better to me. All right, so the actual quantity times actual price. Well, over in this table, we don't have that information, but we do have our actual income statement, and this right here, this $4,992.75 is the actual quantity of wood times the actual price. We will just set it equal to that cell right there, and I will also insert an arrow in here to indicate or highlight that relationship. Okay, so far so good. Pretty easy. We're simply just, again, going to look at this variance right here and break it down into two other components. And this middle column is the key to doing that. This is the actual quantity times the standard price. Now, at this point, we don't have the actual quantity of wood that has been purchased and used. So we would need to gather that from our journal or our bills, whatever source we want to get it from. But we would need to make sure that we are gathering that information. I'm going to enter that information over here. I'm going to add in a couple of columns. And I'm just going to make a note here that the actual linear feet of wood purchased and used is, and I'm just going to enter a number here that you haven't seen before, but it is 2,853. And let me go ahead and wrap that text so that we can see what's going on here. And I will also decrease the size on the screen a little bit. Okay, so we've got these numbers right here. And now we can calculate this middle column. So this is equal to the actual amount of wood that we purchased and used, and we'll multiply it by this standard price per foot of wood, which is $2. Perfect. Okay. So now we're at a point where we can calculate some additional variances. So let's look at what is varying between these two numbers here. Well, if you look at the definitions, both of these are based on the standard price. So the thing that's varying is the quantity. So we're going to call this a quantity variance. And I will merge and center that right there. And this is a generic term. I'll come back and talk about a more specific name for material. But essentially, the difference between these two numbers is due to the quantity. They are both based on the same price of $2 per linear foot of wood. So I'm going to calculate this by taking this number on the left and subtracting from it the number in the middle, and I get a positive $634. Now, I did it in that order so that we can follow with this pattern of making favorable variances positive numbers. So this is a favorable variance. And if you ask yourself, why is it favorable? It's really important that you can intuit this. And if you look at this and kind of think through it, it should make sense. And that is, well, if I used less wood than expected, all else equal, nothing else changed other than I used less wood per top than expected, that should have a positive impact on profit. Okay, so that's a favorable variance. All right, so that's the direct material quantity variance. Now let's go ahead and compare the difference between this middle column and this far right column. Both of these are based on the actual quantity. So the thing that's varying is the price. And so we will therefore call this a price variance. Again, a generic term that we will make more specific in a little bit. All right, and I will look at the difference by taking the middle column, subtracting from it the number on the far right, and that is a positive number. And again, I set it up like this. I didn't do the right minus the left, but the left minus the right, so that that makes this a favorable number here. Okay, and again, what's even more important is just being able to think through this. So if these numbers are both based on the same quantity, the only reason why this number would be lower is because I paid less than expected for each linear foot, or on average, per linear foot of wood. All right, and all else equal, that has a positive impact on profit because my costs go down. Therefore, this is favorable. All right, so this is our direct material price variance right here. Now, this is really cool because if you add these two numbers up, they should equal our spending variance. Let's go ahead and double check to make sure that is the case. Okay, so we get a positive $1,347.25, and indeed that is our direct material spending variance. All right, so that is how we can take this spending variance for material and break it down into a price and a quantity component. Now this is really cool because this provides even better actionable insight. Specifically, if you have an organization where you've got responsibilities divided up such that you've got a purchasing manager that is responsible for buying materials at a certain price versus a production manager that is responsible for overseeing the work and making sure that not too much wood is used or wasted, then you can look at these numbers here and you would know who to address to start gathering more information about why these numbers are the way they are. So in this case here, you'd probably want to give a pat on the back to both the purchasing manager and the production manager. Now, we will actually come back and talk about all these variances together, and the interpretation may not be what it looks like when you look at each variance independently. But for now, I want to finish this little lesson by summarizing these variances over here. So I'm going to go over here, and I'm going to say our direct material quantity variance. We'll set that equal to the 634 favorable, and our direct material price variance is equal to the 713.25 favorable. Now, in some textbooks and in some circles, you may see more specific names given to the direct material quantity variance. In fact, oftentimes it's referred to as a direct material efficiency variance. Okay, and anyway, so you may see that. I'm going to just leave it as quantity variance because we're going to replicate this pattern with direct labor and variable overhead. And I think conceptually it's helpful to recognize that there are price and quantity variances for each of these three variable costs. So in later lessons, we'll talk about the direct labor and the variable overhead price and quantity variances. Okay, so we're making progress on taking the static budget variance and dividing it up into smaller components that give us more insight about who we can talk to discover the root of our problems or to replicate efficiencies that we have made.